Think that we're live, folks. Let's find out. Where's my clipboard at, folks? Oh, what's all this stuff? I am prepared, it seems. Prepared, but regardless, we still thrive. All right, it is exactly 10 a.m. I'm gonna give Jack a ring here. For those of you just joining in, um, we're starting a new series called PoliProx. We don't know if it will be successful or not, but this will be the pilot episode. We're going to conduct an interview, um, and hopefully it's enjoyable for everybody. But near the end, I will open it up to chat for questions for Jack if we have enough time. And that being said, please be sure that all your comments are appropriate, respectful, and yeah, mods, be on the lookout. So with that being said, I don't want to be late here for Jack, so I'm gonna try to give him a call, and we'll see how that works. And to everybody in chat, if you would just keep me updated if there are any issues that happen, audio, visual, etc. Please let me know. Hey Jack, can you hear me?
I can. How you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
Doing well. Been a busy week, but doing well.
Yeah, I bet. Here, give me just 1 second because I've got to fix my output here. Unfortunately, every time I go on Discord, I mess something up. You would think that the guy who's conducting the
I
stream
know
would.
the pro, right? This should be
Yeah, wait. I don't know if we'd call it that. I believe this should do it. All right, let's try that out. Maybe. Can you hear me, Jack?
I can still hear you, but we're waiting on some video. But I can do it.
That's so odd.
Anything works.
Sec. Is it because it might be because Streamlabs is using my camera.
Either way.
If you do want to see my face, which believe me, you're not missing much, you can go to AJK Streams on Twitch, and I'm going to try to make you a little bit bigger here because I feel like that's what people actually want to see. They see enough of me. So, sincerest apologies on not giving you video. That being said, let's jump into this because I want to be cognizant of your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Good to be here.
So Jack, as a general overview, we're just gonna go through some questions. The introduction Jack knows about for full transparency to you guys, and then the actual interview questions I've left Jack blind to so that he can answer, just as honestly as he can, within reason. And of course, if there's anything you don't feel comfortable answering, or that's something you feel that you need to circle back to, feel free to not answer it on stream. We don't want to put you in a tough position. And then
Sounds good.
we have some fun ones near the end to kind of lighten the mood, and then we'll see if the audience has anything to ask, which I will screen for, make sure they're appropriate. So, any questions from you?
No, good for me.
All right, awesome. Well, if you would, could you please give us an introduction of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Jack. I'm the president of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts. That's the Democratic Party's group for under 36 people. That's what we officially define as young. And most of my role in that group relates to getting people in Massachusetts who are under 36, regardless of how they're actually registered, what they're doing, more involved with their local government, the state government, involved in campaigns, the party, public policy in the Commonwealth, basically just doing lots of things to engage young people with the system that governs them and the people that represent them.
That's a tough job, considering the state of politics today, I would say.
It's true. I think Massachusetts, it's an easier place just because of a number of different factors. We get a lot of engaged people, even if they don't actually care about politics specifically. Like if you have someone who is involved enough with, we have a lot of people who are very busy, I think, in Massachusetts. And so that just results in having a lot of people who kind of care generally that their government is working. So it kind of makes it easier. There's lots of people who like have an intrinsic, even if they don't think about it, like, oh, I really care about like the government. They really care about, transportation, or they really care about our state's economy. There's a lot of people like that who are kind of have some sort of intrinsic interest.
Yeah, that's a really good point because it's one of those things where politics you might not care about politics, but politics
Mm,
certainly cares about you, uh, and the
that's
different
true.
parts of your life. So that's good. Um, and then what is the number one message you want viewers to walk away with today? If they have to leave stream after this one question, what do you want them to know?
Yeah, I mean, what I always try and reinforce in people is that getting involved and having some sort of impact in directing the way that things around you go is a lot easier than you think. I think one of the like really big tragedies of government in the U.S. is that there actually is like a very small number of people who are super involved. Like there's a very small number of people who are 100% plugged in. So even if you're just spending like an hour a month, looking into something political, voting in a local election, doing something like that, you're probably much more involved than the average person. And so that means that you have a disproportionate effect on the outcome of things around you, which is a really crazy thing that like there's kind of a low level of engagement. Generally, I've seen a lot of local elections where, turnouts 5, 10%. So if you're one of those 5 or 10%, your voice counts 10 times more than everyone else's. That's really powerful. So I would say it's a lot easier to get involved in things, whether you're already, kind of super involved, getting a little bit more involved is a lot easier than people think.
Wow, that's a really good point. I never really thought about it that way. Of just having
Yeah,
10x impact. It's a little
no,
crazy.
absolutely. Absolutely. In some of these elections, I've had friends who have run for local office in their hometowns get elected with, a couple dozen votes. And
Wow.
they're now people who direct, large amounts of money. They make important decisions about the town. They actually run operations, in direct large budgets and, tens of thousands of dollars in tax revenue every year. And it's on the basis of a couple dozen votes. It's
Wow.
on something you can kind of do in a weekend. So it's very easy, I think, especially for folks watching in Massachusetts or New England, we let a lot of decisions happen very locally. So your voice, if you live in a town of 10,000 people, your voice is pretty big actually. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the national. It's really hard to change who gets elected to Congress. It's really hard to affect the presidential election. It's really easy to affect a lot of the offices that have huge control over your life.
Yeah. Wow. So ground game is important, basically. Local
For sure.
elections. Awesome. I appreciate that. Uh, we will jump into the blind section. I did warn Jack to prepare for the number one thing because I figured that was a little important for him to be able to prep for. So we'll jump into the blind questions, and I will warn you. Uh, if there's something that I feel strongly about, I might push back. But other
Sure.
than that, we're just gonna kind of roll with it, have some dialogue on it. But I don't suspect any major for pushback. All
Sure.
right. So you might have answered this a little bit already, but what do you specifically do within your day-to-day roles within the party?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to people who are not involved, trying to get them involved. And so we do a lot of kind of brute force outreach, sending a lot of messages to people, mail, going up to people at events. I spend a lot of time talking to people, trying to identify the like low hanging fruit for how they can get involved in their community. And some of that's really easy because there's kind of a checklist, right? One of the ways that I like to really encourage people is to learn about, who are the people that represent you. If you live in Massachusetts, there is someone who represents you at the town or city level. And you probably don't know who that person is unless you're already pretty plugged in. If you do know who that person is, congratulations, you're probably like significantly more plugged in than most of the people around you. And you should talk to other people because they probably don't know who that person is. But I think I spend a lot of time, identifying for people. I will often like, I'll start talking to someone and they'll be like, something, something, something. I'm from Framingham, and I'll be like, Framingham has an open library trustee seat this year. If you want to be involved in, spending $1 million on how your public library runs, there's a brand new opportunity that literally no one has spoken for. You should go get involved in that. And I spend a lot of time trying to ID those opportunities for people.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's definitely not something I think that most people think about. Is there are tax dollars out there that if you're not dictating where they're going, somebody else is. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'll just say, in my city, we have a budget of $330 million a year. And in total, I think I was one of maybe 6 or 8 people who showed up to testify on how we wanted that spent this year.
wow,
So again, if you're showing up, if you're engaging in a lot of these processes, you know, there's a lot of the reason why people aren't super involved is that for the most part, we do this pretty well. But especially if you have a cause that you really care about that really isn't being kind of championed or advocated for by someone, and you show up, again, your voice is just going to have this huge disproportionate impact because, I live in a city of, 80,000 people and 6 people showed up, to testify. That it has a larger impact.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Moving on to a little bit larger, I believe you recently attended the Democratic National Convention. Is that correct?
I went to the convention last August and the most recent DNC meeting in
Yes.
February. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. The meeting is what I meant. Apologies for that. What does that look like? What does a DNC meeting look like?
Well, I'll start off by, most people, we make this really hard to understand because both are DNC, right? Democratic National Committee and Democratic National Convention. And this is something people, I think, actually would benefit from learning from. The convention is 4,000 people, a ton of people from every state that are actually directly elected, usually in like, you go to a local church or government building near you and there's an election and you elect usually like 10 people that represent just your little local area, and those people basically have one job, and it's choosing the nominees for president and vice president. The national committee is a much smaller group, about 10 times as small, just 400 people who represent the party kind of permanently. The convention happens once every 4 years. The committee meets a bunch of times throughout the course of the year. Those people actually run the Democratic Party. They are the Democratic Party. And in February, the really important thing that they did was they elected their officers, including a brand new chairman. For folks who don't know, when there's not a Democratic president, those party members are totally free on who to pick as the leader of the party. When there is a Democratic president, they usually select someone, and that choice is approved by the committee. But we're in, obviously, now with a Republican president. Democrats, those 400 people choose among themselves. They can choose anybody to be chair of the Democratic Party, and that person runs the show for the next 4 years. So it's a pretty big job, and we just selected the DNC selected Ken Martin, who was formerly the chair of the Minnesota Dems, is now the national chair of the Democratic Party.
Wow. So essentially, the committee has a huge influence on probably the next presidential election 4 years from now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, especially the midterm elections. You're electing the person who decides how the tens of millions. We just saw this last election, $1 billion. This is the person who directs a lot of the money, sets the priorities for the party, and also makes really important calls about like, what is the big priority for Democrats this cycle? Do they want to win, the United States House? We're trying to hold some seats in the Senate, or are we really saving powder for the presidential? What I think that we've seen already, in a big show from what Ken Martin's thinking looks like is that every election matters. And so, I saw a press release from the DNC recently about the Westchester County executive in New York election and a mayoral election in Oklahoma were actually things that the National Party were focused on. And that's pretty irregular, right? Like we really don't see the DNC spending a ton of, time, looking at every individual mayoralship in Oklahoma. But that was something that was on the radar this week. So I think that person who's the chair has a lot of control over, what's the priority? What's the most important thing for us to focus on? I think what we're seeing from Chair Martin is that the small elections that build their way up are something that he really cares about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, speaking of priorities, I'm curious as to your thoughts on the main issues that currently face the U.S. and do you believe that there are available solutions? Um, I have some examples here of just something to get us started if you believe these are a priority, but we're looking at housing crisis, cost of living crisis, healthcare crisis, education crisis, and I'm sure a plethora of other crises as well. Um, but what do you say are the main few issues that we should really be worried about?
Yeah, I mean, I would say as a Boston resident, housing is a huge priority that comes up time and time again. And it's something that probably we're actually going to see a heightened price of housing, especially new construction coming in the next couple of months here. I also just think that this week, one of the things that can't be escaped, just with the amount of international attention it got, was kind of our foreign relations and domestic security. A lot of discussions this week about Ukraine, the kind of future of our alliance with Europe. And I think that while those things are kind of they affect us a little bit less, on the day-to-day operations. The fact that Europe has been engaged in a large-scale war for the last year really has affected the price of a lot of important foodstuffs and especially energy prices.
Yep.
Which, being in winter in New England, energy prices are really important. Especially as you get up into New Hampshire and Maine, you get a lot of oil heating. I know people that were paying extraordinary amounts because energy prices, because of Russian sanctions and Russia holding off releasing a lot of energy resources to us as a way to punish Americans has really impacted people's lives in a way that I don't think people go and pay the oil bill and like, oh damn it, Russia, that was annoying. But it really like it's making hundreds of dollars a month difference for people. So whether you're keyed into it or not, it is playing a huge difference. And I think especially as we go to see, we live fairly close to the Canadian border.
Mhm.
If we do wind up seeing a 25% general tariff on Canada, it's going to make some pretty huge changes to the
Yes.
pricing of American goods, and especially for us up here where we do our largest trading partner is Canada and Massachusetts. So we really, and that's true for a lot of the northern states up here. That will have a really big impact.
Yeah.
We'll be seeing that for sure.
I I agree. If these trade wars with Canada and Mexico do ensue,
Mm.
Russia will look like nothing by comparison for the raised cost. I mean, I believe the statistic for how
Yeah.
much oil we get from Canada is absurd.
Wait, yeah, and it's I mean, people like Russia, Russia's kind of a has-been state. We really don't do a ton of trade with them.
As an
Their
American,
economy is
I
smaller
like to
than New
hear
York.
that.
No, it's completely true. Like they are relevant because they are, unpredictable and have a large
Yes.
nuclear arsenal and are willing to invade countries, but their economy is smaller than New York State. So if
Wow.
you're kind of sitting around thinking about New England, yeah, it's a very small, on the cosmic scale. Canada and Mexico, on the other hand, are almost a majority of all of our domestic trade, which I think Russia's 1 or 2%.
Wow.
So you really don't feel, and we've had some pretty tough sanctions on Russia. But no, we get a lot of not just energy from Canada, although we do get a lot of energy. One thing actually that I is kind of another international issue that I've tried very hard to get people to care about. That just this seems to be one of those things that's really hard. Canadians pay like half the price for electricity that we do in Massachusetts,
Wow.
in part because they just have this huge abundance of hydropower there, right? They have rivers, they've set up these dams, they're generating tons of energy. They really want to sell it to us, and we haven't been able to make that the physical electrical connection to do that. But if we could, we'd half electrical prices, which I know, like I recently, came into the position where I pay my own electrical bill, and it's a lot. It's a lot. And I think that a lot of people in Massachusetts have that same experience of paying 40 45 cents a kilowatt for electricity. The Canadians pay like 20,
Wow.
less than half, and we could totally have access to purchase that same electrical power. But it's one of those things that it needs 5 different governmental approvals. It's really hard. But I think if you phrased it to people like, hey, is it important to you to cut your electricity bill in half, you'd have a ton of people that would be like, yeah, no, that would be like number one thing on my priorities list if I knew that was something I could put on my elected officials radar. But I think because you have to make the step of like, actually the thing that we need is advocacy from our elected officials to get regulatory approval from the state of Maine to build a conduit, like that's like one step too far. But it's part of the reason I'm really interested in getting more people to kind of get one level more involved, because really, like if your elected official was campaigning, they asked you what's a big issue for you, and you said, well, really the regulatory approval for the energy conduit in Maine was important. I promise that elected official doesn't hear that often, but it probably would be the most efficient way if you were trying to cut your electricity bill, if you were trying to save money, like having that next level of engagement to put it on your electeds' radars. That would probably be the most effective way to lower your monthly costs if you're a Massachusetts person who pays an electrical bill.
So that segues really nicely into my next question. Um, and it's that, do you feel that the Democrats have a messaging problem? Because it
Yeah.
seems like, you know, we know, like the steps that are needed in
Mm.
order to cut these costs for Americans.
Yeah.
We don't really hear
Yeah.
that from the top scale elected officials in the Democratic Party of like, hey, we can fix this for you. It's a matter of other people, whether it be parties or regulations, holding us up. So, is that something that Democrats could start winning on the messaging front?
Yeah, we have an enormous messaging problem. Anyone who tells you that there's not a messaging problem with the Democratic Party is probably paid to do messaging for the Democratic Party. Truly, or is the kind of person who like is happy with any messaging. It's egregious. Like we really need to be talking about solutions-oriented government actions, and talk very plainly to people. Like I think that a lot of people made the decision kind of in 2016 that complicated government policy isn't something we want to talk directly to the American people about. I think that's pretty silly. I think most Americans get it. Most Americans kind of understand, and I've seen this with tons of Massachusetts voters who I've spoken with, and I do a lot of the like door to door, like, hello, I'm campaigning for this candidate. Please vote for them. What are the issues that are really important to you? Kind of talking. And frankly, I think voters, for the most part, they get it. They don't need slogans or buzzwords to give them the keys to all this. I think if you talk with a lot of people directly about I think housing costs is one of the big one. Democrats could do a much better job explaining, like, and our state is starting now to do this. We're talking about, hi, the state's going to make it a priority to build 200,000 new homes. If we do this, it's going to be substantially easier if you're someone who's renting right now and you're looking at the entry price for homes. If we build 200,000 more homes in Massachusetts, the starting price for a house isn't going to be $800,000. It's going to be $500,000. And that's going to make it way easier for you to buy into the housing
Right.
market. And I think that we need to be that clear with people, right? Like we need to tell them, and you got to kind of do like the step one, step two, step three. And I think that we're starting now to actually do a better job of that, especially on the housing front. We have to explain to people the steps that are necessary to get it there, especially when you're talking about something that is kind of market oriented. It's really hard to explain to people
Hmm.
because I think that for a lot of people know inherently, like, hey, if you've got more of a thing, it makes it cheaper to buy one of those things. But I think you have to kind of connect it. You got to connect it for people, right? And so
Yeah.
you have to be like, listen, it is too expensive to rent or buy a home right now. And part of the problem with that is that there's a scarcity, right? Like there's tons more people that live in Massachusetts than there was 10 years ago. There's only a little bit more homes. If you want those two things to not continue to get further apart, you've got to build more homes. And I think, at the local level, something that's even more important, and this actually it's great timing. Last week in Cambridge made a huge change to their zoning maps. There used to be places where they required, if you're going to build something on this piece of land, it's got to be a single family home. Well, if you build one house on a lot in Cambridge, it's going to cost $3 million. If you build 10 houses, they're going to cost $300,000. So like you got to kind of explain to people why those kind of policies too. Cambridge is a dense urban municipality. Having lots where you were telling, and I think some of this too, something we talk about a lot in Boston is like developers, right? Like they have this, oh, they want to make money, and they do. And so you have to think about too, what kind of regulations can we talk about that, allow people to make money building cheap housing and not building, multi-million-dollar housing. And one of the most effective ways to do that is, increase the density for people. But I think there's a lot of elected officials who don't want to do, don't want to get into this level of discussion with people, maybe because they're afraid that people will have kind of more complex questions. But I think we need to, for the good of democracy, we need to get at that level of conversation. And I think, doing that at the federal level too is something that Democrats have to get into that discussion of why does it matter? Okay, like you have to make a case that's generalizable enough to the average person. Why should I actually care that you're saying you're going to do this?
That's a great point, and I'm gonna I'm gonna tack onto this. I think Democrats really need to reclaim the phrase common sense because
Mm,
currently it is extremely effective for conservatives, Republicans, what
yeah,
have you, to just say,
yeah,
well, it's common sense to do it the way that we're
mhm,
doing it. Um, but it's really not in most
right.
cases. It's really not. And it's like you said, if you have more supply, it drives the cost down. If you have that if you have that shift in the supply curve, trying to
Right.
remember the
Right.
the
Yeah. You're
graph.
thinking back like I am right
Yeah.
there. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. And I think, right, like, I think we also want to avoid people don't like being lectured to, right? So they don't
Right.
want an economics lesson, right? They don't want someone
Exactly.
going, well, listen, we have to alter the supply curve, and oh, you don't know supply curves. It's like, no, like, you got to talk about it like a normal person too. I
Yeah.
think there are some Democrats that run into this problem too, is it becomes like a professorial kind of thing. Is it's like you can say this in a normal way that you sound like a real person, like, we want people to be able to live in houses. We don't have enough, and so that makes it cost more. Let's build some more so they cost less. Like you can say this like a normal, like, and sound like a human, without it's not that hard. It's easier, honestly. It's easier than getting into a high tech, academic argument. It's simpler. So let's do it.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, bullying is extremely effective when it comes to uh, political arguments. Instead of laying out your argument as this might be controversial, Jack, but instead of laying out your argument in that professorial way, instead it seems more effective when the conservatives go, "No, you're stupid. This is common sense." And so
Right.
instead of trying to fight from the lectern, we need to maybe come down to their level and be like, "No, it's common sense from our side. No, you essentially." Um,
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I think we've seen, we have some, politicians in Massachusetts that have done this and just kind of been a little more blunt force with the argument, and said, listen, when we're talking about an issue like this and you're trying to make it more complex than it is, that harms people too.
yeah,
It makes people's, when you're like, well, actually, it's not that simple. Sometimes it's okay to say, no, it is.
yeah,
It's that simple, and it's what we should be doing. And look at you, guy across the stage. If you don't want to do that, maybe the voters should ask why. Why is it that this person is against this policy that's going to help you? And I think that that's a very it's helpful when you do that, because oftentimes there is a reason, right? There's lots of people, on the whatever economic issue it is. There's always two sides of it, right? And it's I think it's important to ask those questions about why might someone not be in favor of having frictionless trade with Canada. Is it because they would stand to make a lot of money because they sell something
yes,
that
because
if
they
we
own an
increase the
American car company.
right, something like that.
Right,
And I think that that's the case. And I think that one of the unfortunate side effects of this sometimes is that we also don't spend enough time getting into the next level of the argument. But I think common sense and speaking to people honestly, plainly, directly is helpful. And I think part of the tragedy is that I know some people that are like common sense voters, and they made the decision that Trump was the common sense candidate in the last election. And I think that's purely a failure of messaging. And I think it says
agreed.
that we did something pretty bad. We were particularly bad at this with young people. If there were people who were really saying, "Oh, well, he's common sense." Like if you can look at everything that Trump says and does and come about it and say, "Yeah, but comparing candidates, it sounds like he's more common sense." There's a huge messaging failure.
Yes, 100%
Yeah.
agreed. And sorry to hark on this topic, but I'll just stay here for one more moment. But one other major resistance to change in individuals, I feel, is the attack on the ego. So,
Mm,
for example, when we when we're lecturing people and coming from this position of intellectualism, which I think is a good place to come from in general, a lot of people feel that you're calling them stupid. And I think
mm,
that has been an issue for a lot of the people who are maybe like would consider themselves like moderate voters or centrists.
mm.
They feel that they're being called stupid by the Democratic Party and it turns them off. So, whatever we
Yeah.
can do to avoid that is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm careful to say you speak plainly and commonly to people, but I really do believe most people understand these things. They understand, the general impacts of policies, and you don't need to go down to a crazy level of
Right.
simplicity. But because really, I think a lot of people, even people that you might not expect, I spent a lot of time campaigning in New Hampshire in areas where the college education rate was below a third. You have a ton of people who understand the economics of the school system there extremely well, better than most people that I know. And so I think you really have to factor in how much people, especially people who spend a little bit of time, thinking about this kind of thing, have a really great understanding of the way that it works. And so if you make an argument, I think that you make an argument that's straightforward, simple, but kind of grounded in a complex idea. You can totally get across a winning message to people, and you'll earn their votes.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. This one's a little more intense, and probably tough. Uh,
Mm,
how do Democrats plan to de-radicalize young men? So I know,
mm,
as a little bit of context, there's a ton of this red pill, black pill content out there. The Andrew Tates of the world, a lot of a lot of misogyny and patriarchy that is flies under the radar for the most part because again, it's so normalized in online platforms and social media that it just kind of is accepted. So, is
mm.
there a plan from the Democrats to address this, or is this just kind of one of those things that we're dealing with as a society?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things that Democrats in elected office can do is kind of lead by example. And I think that we do, for the most part, do that, represent ourselves well. I think that Democrats are need to have a message that's a lot less about controlling people and kind of social engineering. I think one of the ways that we eliminate, the British would call this, right, like antisocial behavior, but like anything that if you're doing anything that's racist, homophobic, sexist, those kind of things. I think we've kind of learned that like the process of making that illegal is not an effective way to do that. I
Right.
think instead, yeah, yeah, and I think most Americans agree on that, right? Like that's not the way to actually, trim this down. I think that, frankly, we have a lot of we have a lack of socialization. And I'm not sure there's a great solution to this. I will say, at the municipal level, one thing that I'm really engaged in is this kind of academic idea of like third spaces, but essentially it's like having common spaces where people can
Yeah.
interact. And I think especially, today, and it's a third space, right? Because you have work, you have home, and a lot of people spend 90% of their time in those two places. I've been really interested at the municipal level. How can we make sure that we have social places where people can go? And whether it's, building, walkable spaces where people can have access to lots of businesses and cafes in one big area, right? Where people can kind of walk around and, meet other people, whether it's really good library or government owned common spaces. One thing that we're doing a lot more in the greater Boston area is we're actually building up. We have a development plan. All right, you want to build a 30-story building. One of the things that we have to have from you is at the ground level, we want a public space where people can come in, sit, talk to other people. That's a really important thing. And so, I don't know, at the national level, it's a little more complex, right, on how we talk about this kind of thing. But I do think having places where people can interact with each other, because I think a lot of this awful behavior, I hate to say it on Twitch, but I do think some of it's like people who are very online, right? Like it's
Yes.
people who are, don't spend a lot of time actually talking to the people that they see a funny meme that's hateful about a particular group of people, and they retweet that. But it's I really do think that if you were spending a lot of your time around, the kind of people that was targeting, you just wouldn't do it because you're like, no, that's that. Hey, that is talking about a group of people that's one of my friends, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say that. That's stupid. And I think a lot of it is. I mean, I think Obama said this really well, like in 2009. Just like don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Don't engage in that. It's not good for you because it makes you kind of look like a jerk.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm not sure if anyone's coined this as like a good political phrase yet, but also don't be a jerk. That should be a really good. I mean, like I think if
Very.
you want to be like a
No,
yeah.
sorry. I didn't want to cut you off. Keep going.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, if you want to be like a popular person who has lots of friends and that people think highly of and that is given opportunities in life, don't be a jerk. That's a great
Yeah.
lesson to live by. And I think one of the ways that we in the party and in government can kind of lead by this example is don't vote for people that are jerks. That's
Yes.
an important even if it is something that might get you really popular with one group of people. I know plenty of um, I think it's mostly a Republican strategy, but I know plenty of Democrats that engage in this like I'm going to make fun of a particular group of people until I get elected, and that's a bad mentality. And don't vote for people that advocate
Oh
that
wow.
kind of leadership.
I
Yeah,
did not. I
and I
was
mean
not privy to this.
no, I mean there are people, and I think um, for we were talking about housing a little bit ago. There's kind of a trend recently to just like hate on NIMBYs. Be like if there's someone who is opposing local housing, hate on that group of people as hard as you can. and be jerks to them to kind of bully them. And I don't think that's a winning view either. Like, and I say this as someone who is, aggressively pro housing. I don't think the way that we get more people to vote for cheaper housing is to bully the people that are hesitant against it and just be, no, you're stupid. I don't think that that works.
Yeah.
I think that if you are a little bit more willing to embrace all people and kind of talk about what it is that you believe and why other people should believe that. And if people don't want to agree with you, don't be jerks to them. I think it's a long term, I think we've seen this a lot with the last elections. There's a lot of like fine tuning. How do we engineer our perfect path to 51% of the vote so that we can empower? Instead of thinking about the long terms of like, hey, if we alienate this group of people this election, is that going to come back and bite us in 4, 8, 12 years? Are we going to regret having really been jerks to this particular segment of the voter base? And I think that that's a more real thing than people realize. And especially as someone who is in their 20s in politics, like I want to see, I'm a Democrat. I want to see a policy from the Democrats that still works when I'm 80. Like I want that to be, yeah, no, like, and so I'm thinking 60 years in the future here, and I think that there's a lot of Democratic leaders who are like, all right, I just got to win 2 or 3 more elections.
Yep.
So what's the cheapest way to get there right now? And it's less about building the kind of long-term sustainable, base for a party, and that means you can't alienate a huge segment of the electorate. And I think unfortunately we do that right now. And I think we've got to be more careful about that when we advocate policies. Again, I think it's bad in every election because there are lots of people who don't vote for jerks. And again, if you're doing the kind of stuff where you're demeaning people because of their views or you're treating people like they're stupid, on any one particular issue, you might lose that person who agrees with you. I mean, we keep seeing this in polls, right? Like people say they agree with Democrats on like 80% of the issues. Every time there's a poll,
Right.
they keep saying, but yet they're still voting for Republicans. And
Yeah.
so I think you have to kind of you got to ask the question of why. And I think a lot of it comes down to it's this broad area of communication. But I think that that's a part of it. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And I've got to say thank you because you continue to give me like perfect segues into the next question. Um, so, with that being said, of alienating different voters and voter bases, do you feel that the Democratic Party shifts left or right to pick up voters on the political spectrum? For example,
Mm,
Kamala seemed to shift right on issues like immigration, healthcare, and Palestine after the initial jump off of her campaign, and it seemed like she was trying to pick up those, center voters, those moderate voters, which,
mm,
if we're being honest, I don't believe those voters truly exist.
mm,
I think a lot of people vote based off of vibes. They're not like sitting in the
yeah.
middle waiting for somebody to capitulate to them.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that you're absolutely spot on with that end bit there about most voters aren't ideological. Like, I talk to a lot of political people and I have a lot of political people who can describe their ideology really well, right? Like, oh, I'm a liberal, I'm a leftist, I'm a conservative, I'm an alt-right conservative. Like I
God,
know the
I
kind of
hope
people that
not.
think like that. No, yeah, I know. Like, but I know the people that think like that, but I
Yes.
really don't think that like more than 20% of Americans are like, I would vote for Kamala if she was 10% less liberal.
Right.
I don't really think that those people are there. I really think it's a communication thing. And I think, and I think sometimes it's a one issue here and there thing.
Right.
There's a particular issue that you can't get it wrong on. And I do think one of those things this year I heard a lot about was like, price fixing at grocery stores as the way to get prices down. I think a lot of Americans kind of understand you can't really, that's not like a really workable solution. But I think a lot of those things are not really ideological, right? Like it's not like, that we were seeing a broad embrace of that. So frankly, I think the one thing that I would totally agree, uh, you know, kind of in contrast to what I was previously saying that Democrats kind of got right is that the platform, if you read through the platform, which no one does, I did, and I did because I was there in Chicago as a delegate and needed to vote to approve it or not. But like I bet less than 1% of people actually read the Democratic Party
Correct.
platform. But I think that platform is super popular. Like, and I read through it, and I know a large spectrum of Democrats, right? Like I know super progressive Democrats. I know conservative Democrats. I maybe 5% of stuff would have been controversial. I think the vast majority of Americans would agree. And we keep seeing this in polling, right? Like the stuff that Democrats generally advocate for is super popular, but I think it's a messaging problem. I do think that there are some voters who, particularly now, I think we've kind of felt that we've been so sure of our standing with social liberals for so long, in part because I think there was just this objective truth that Democrats were on the popular side of the social issues from like 2009 to 2020, maybe. That like the Obama coalition of like, Democrats are pro gay marriage, Democrats are against hate. Those things were just so overwhelming. And we saw this, right? Like approval for gay marriage hit something like 70%. And it was looking to be like, wow, Republicans are never going to win another election on social issues, at least not nationally, because they're not on the right side of this. And I think that we got super comfortable with our position on social issues for that reason. And I think that came back to bite us a little bit in 2024, because I do think we had lots of voters who said, I've considered myself with the Democrats on social issues. I think this kind of describes the voter we were talking about earlier, who's like, well, I'm socially liberal and fiscally conservative, even though I don't think most people know what that
No,
means.
they
But
do
there's
not.
people who, right? Yeah, there's people who like consider themselves that way, right? And that's a fine thing to to think about like that. But I think that a lot of those voters we buckled with because they started thinking, well, I'm socially liberal, but I'm not sure, if I can find myself with the current kind of terminology that the party is using, or that a very small number of people in the party are using that has kind of taken hold of what voters' conceptions are.
I
And
think,
I think
yeah,
that ensuring that, and I think sometimes this requires a ton of courage from the Democratic uh, nominees for high office to be able to say, oh, that idea, no, that's silly. I'm not for that. And in understanding that you might upset the people on the very far ends of a particular issue, that are upset by that. You might buckle your support with them, but the vast majority of people are going to say, no, I agree with that.
yeah.
And I think so. So to answer your question, I don't think the party needs to move at all. I also don't think that voters would notice if we changed the platform, to make it particularly more towards one. I don't think anyone would notice. I think it's all about the messaging, right? Like could you even, could anyone tell us the difference between the 2008 Democratic Party platform and the 2012 Democratic Party platform? Was
No,
one more progressive than the other? Like, I don't know, and I consider myself to be pretty in the know about these. Like, I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone cares because it's all about the way that it comes off to people.
yeah. And Obama, after pulling America out of the recession,
Mm,
Obama won by a smaller margin in 2012 than in
yeah.
2008. So this is
Yeah,
it.
actually, I think, if I can just briefly jump in on that,
Yeah,
I think that being the incumbent party actually comes with a ton of disadvantages in
I
America. And
agree.
I think that that is like most squarely, there's never one reason, but if you had to put one reason on why Kamala Harris lost the presidential election, it is that when you're the incumbent party, you own every bad thing that's happened for the last 4 years. And that's so hard, especially during like the crazy pandemic nature of like
Hmm.
2020, 2021, 2022. Like you're going to own the COVID pandemic. Like it's like some of the suckiest years in the last 60 years. You're going to have to bear the responsibility for that. It doesn't matter how well you do. I mean, Joe Biden could have made everyone twice as rich as they were before that. If you were responsible for the 2 or 3 years when people couldn't live their lives like they had for the last 20 years before that, you're going to get a huge ding from voters. And I think a certain part of that is inescapable. And it's just, I think it's unfortunate that that election timeline went when it was.
I will say, um, you have great points there, but I will say that whoever made this call, whether it was
Mm,
Kamala or someone on her team or multiple people, when she had the opportunity to break away from Biden, that was her
mm,
chance to really distance herself from the issues. I
mm,
think it was out of respect for him and respect
yeah,
for the name that she didn't. But she could have completely done a NASA launch separation stage from him and just
mm,
lost a lot of that dead weight. Because
yeah,
it's true, any party that experiences massive inflation or massive economic crises, loses the next election, this was the one scenario where it wasn't an incumbent running again saying that they're going to do something different.
Mm,
It's a whole different person. So she had an
yeah,
opportunity there, but she basically said, no, I'd pretty much keep everything the same aside from like these small, these couple of things. And I think conservatives were able to really leverage that clip from whatever news station it was. I saw it a ton, and I was like, "Yeah, this looks bad. You probably should have been like, oh well, we're gonna make major changes for cost of living." So,
mm.
um, that being
Yeah,
said,
I agree.
uh,
Yeah,
but you have great points there. Being the incumbent is not always an advantage. I mean, think of Trump. Trump lost to sleepy Joe
yeah,
Biden, who was his senior.
yeah.
And I say that jokingly, of course. But like I said, let's push on a little bit personal here. What's the highest level of office that you see yourself pursuing?
So right now, I'm really happy to be. I'm a city party chair in Massachusetts. I'm city chair of the city of Somerville, which is a publicly known thing. And I really enjoy doing that. I think it's the largest Democratic constituency that I would want to represent. Because I will say, I was actually just talking with someone last night who's a Democratic Party chair in another state for a county, and it's a county that has a quarter million people. And I frankly don't know how you do that. Like, I'm not sure how you actually have a meaningful connection to 250,000 people. I think I'm one of the reasons I really love being from Massachusetts is that we break the state into enough parts that like you can really be accountable to the people that you represent. You can really be in touch with them. You can understand, where their, thoughts and feelings are on the issues. I think when you get to larger constituencies like that, it's really hard because, and this is something I think about a lot when I vote now, you got to trust the person. You got to look at them and trust their judgment because you have to understand, right? Like your US senator never going to be able to take a good enough temperature check to
Yeah,
cast the vote on the basis of that alone, right? It's just not possible. Even if you're from a small, really small, like if you're the senator from Delaware, maybe you could check it. You could have enough town halls to get people sent on a really big issue, but you got to trust the person. And so I'm really interested in offices where you can connect with people like that. And I started as a ward Democratic committee member, so I represented just 12,000 people, and now I'm the city Democratic Party chair, and we have 50,000 people in the city. And I appreciate that, and I like representing all of the young Dems under 36. I think that that's really nice. Um, but one of the things I want to advocate for people too is I think there's a lot more meaningfulness in local offices than there is necessarily with larger state offices, especially because you can have that foot in politics. Actually, this is a really important thing I want to get out there to people. It's not a full time job. You can be like 95% of local elected officials in Mass. It is not your full time job. Maybe even 97%. It is a way that you can. It's essentially like community volunteering on steroids. You are a volunteer. You have this additional role in your community, but you can also completely live the life that you've been living. You can be completely connected to everything that you used to do. You can have your full time job, your family, all these things. Um, yeah.
that's great. That's great. That kind of takes care of one of the questions that I had
Mm,
following. So that's perfect. So for those in chat, get involved where you can in your local politics. It's important. I will tell you. Somebody in my chat did say, "I like this guy. What a great stream to wake up to this morning." So there you go. At least you're getting some
thank you.
good feedback here. Um,
I,
if it's all right with you, we'll move on to some of the less serious questions, and then after that, we'll take some
mm,
questions from the audience. Um, this truly is, low risk, low reward.
sure.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what Disney character best represents you? And since the buyout, Star Wars is included, if you like.
What Disney character best represents it? It's a great. Um, I never once thought about that before. That's interesting. I've always felt like a weird affinity for Nemo's dad,
Oh,
only because I
Marlin.
feel like so much of yeah, I feel like so much of my life is like keeping stuff on track. Whether it's like getting people together, like keeping things in order, and I constantly feel the like oh my God, where's Nemo? Like moment of that film. It's probably not a great character to feel
I
like
think it
related, but I
speaks
do
to your
feel like
dedication, right?
something like that. Although he lost Nemo, didn't he? So, but I do feel like a lot of so something I'm trying to get better at is being a little more proactive in things and being a little less like constantly following along, checking up on things, and trying to forge out, make my own path, try and be proactive in getting things done. And that's my New Year's resolution. That's off to a middling start.
No, that's a really good goal. So, no, thank you for that. Um, what historical event would you want to see with your own eyes? Caveat:
Mm,
you can only observe, so you can't change anything. That might impact your answer.
that's interesting. Um, I would love to be like, I've read a lot about the like Krakatoa volcano explosion, like just how far away um, you were from that. I would love to see people's reaction to like the giant supersonic, like was I, heard for hundreds of miles around. I just think that that would have been like a weird thing to be there in the moment and like know like, oh yeah, that's a volcano exploding. Well, everyone else around is just like, oh my god, the Earth is exploding and we're all gonna die. I just think it would be really interesting to have that kind of piece of a scientific knowledge from before. Maybe actually, I might like to go back and see what all the dinosaurs really looked like because I was reading something recently about how we just really don't know. It's a lot of like good guesses about like what all these things looked like. But I just like there's probably so much that's so wrong. Like I remember from when I was a kid, like the depictions of dinosaurs have changed so much. And I just think that like what's massively interesting to me is how much we've learned about the history of the planet that we weren't here for. And I just think it's one of those things that we'll probably never know a really good answer to a huge piece of it. And part of why I really like, one of my to bring it back to government, one of my big government passions is doing a lot of R&D research. Making sure that we fund a lot of this research and exploration because oftentimes we learn all sorts of things that are super useful to these days. And so I really appreciate when we have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Awesome. Thank you for that. It's fun. It's funny you say Krakatoa. I never really gave it much thought, but my fiance. Okay, this is a little silly. My fiance loves to yell Krakatoa and then pretend to like hit something. I think it's a SpongeBob reference, to be honest, but I wasn't allowed to watch
Oh,
SpongeBob growing up, so to
me
any
neither.
degree, I'll have to
We'll
let
have
her
to be
know
in
you.
ignorance on that.
uh,
Yeah.
now I need to look up this event because
This,
I'm not super familiar.
yeah, it's just funny to me that like, probably one of the few things pre 1900 that was like a world event that actually affected people, like across the globe. And I really like I'm probably a total weirdo that I spend a ton of time thinking about like events in human history that had huge impact. And it's just funny to me that like a volcano erupting was something that was shared from so many different people.
Yeah, I don't think
And,
that's weird at
and yeah,
all. I
yeah,
find historical events very intriguing. Maybe that's the nerd in me, but I personally love thinking about those things, and it also,
yeah.
I don't know, it brings perspective to current events, so it's good.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
last one from me before we jump into audience here because I know we're running short on time. Is there another political figure you would like to see come on to this show?
Mm. I think it would be really great to have someone who holds a local elected office come and talk about exactly what that looks like. Because I think people are shocked all the time. Like people think, all right, you're elected, county commissioner, and you spend all day in an office every day doing this, and that's just not what a lot of these roles look like. And I think it would be really like I think it would be a lot easier to convince people to run for local offices if they actually like could hear from someone who holds, they're a local select board member. They actually know what that looks like because I think a lot of people, if they knew, like, hey, this is something that I could do, you'd have a ton more people who run. And I do think one of the big tragedies of our democratic system is that so many elections are uncontested when there are absolutely oodles and oodles of qualified people sitting around for some of these posts.
Yeah,
And I just think the more civic involvement you can get from good natured people, the better we're off we're going to be.
absolutely. I appreciate that answer. So for those of you in chat, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in chat. We already have a couple that I'll get started with, that I think are really good. And Jack, I'm not sure how short you are on time. I don't know if you can run over and
Okay,
all.
got some good time. Got till about 11:15.
Oh, wonderful. But hopefully we don't take that long. That being said, this is from Colts Fans for Life. He asks, what's your take on healthcare in terms of how it works in
Mm.
our country? Do you think we would benefit from the free healthcare that is offered in foreign countries since healthcare is very expensive? And a little bit of background for you chatters. Uh, Pretty much every other developed country in the world has universal healthcare except for the United States. I believe we're the only developed country that does this insurance
Mm.
middleman system. So, Jack, we'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that makes America really great is the fact that we have really innovative people. And I think a lot of people whose contributions to society could have otherwise been enormous are really limited just because of the economic system that we put on healthcare there. And so I think having we also we waste a lot of money on administrative costs, to overhead, and administrative fees. So I do think having a system that works more in kind of the public sector, or at least having a one of the, I think the biggest missed opportunities of the last couple decades was the fact that Obamacare didn't include that public option to offer a government-run program and say, here is what the U.S. government would provide as a buy-in healthcare program that essentially will operate at government cost and let all the other insurers compete with that one program. Because if you do that, you're going to drive the competition significantly. And so instead of just competing with each other, you cut a ton of that cost out of the insurance market. I think that was a huge missed opportunity. I think we missed it by like one vote. And it's also my reason why I tell a lot of people, like, go out and vote for like one more Democrat. Like, just give us the chance. Because if we ever get into that position again, where we have, the ability to pass a new piece of legislation, that was like the biggest miss, and we missed it because Joe Lieberman just did not want to get on board with that. We got 59 votes for it and not 60.
Wow.
But like, really, that would have been, and Obama wanted to do it. You had like 99% of Democrats wanted to do it. Independent, who we needed the vote from, Joe Lieberman, we couldn't get him there on that in 2009. But I do think that would have been, and that's a super achievable thing too. A lot of people have healthcare, policies that involve needing to gut the entire U.S. healthcare system, and so one, it's going to probably be a while until something like that happens. But two, the amount of public support and funding that you're going to need to make it happen will take a decade to implement. A public option is something the Democrats could do the second that they get back into power with a reconciliation bill. If you get 50 Democratic senators, 218 Democratic members of the House, we can have a public option, dramatically bring down the cost of healthcare for Americans, and do it in a way that actually forces reform among insurance companies too. And so you don't have one of the biggest, issues that people often talk about in these healthcare systems is a ton of people losing their jobs, a lot of people losing coverage from their healthcare in the meantime, because you have to transition. There's no other way to do it. You have to, completely switch from having a public sector that, is a very big part of the private economy, transitioning it into government. A public option on the healthcare plan would help with that enormously. So yeah, sorry, long answer.
Oh,
I'll
good.
keep them shorter, but yeah.
It's a very good answer. Yeah, to echo that, it seems that the public sentiment towards the current healthcare system is very negative based off of recent events regarding healthcare CEOs. Not
Mm,
a lot of empathy from the American public on what happened, and I think that's
mm,
a direct result of how people feel about the current system. But yeah,
yeah.
that would be great if we could get anything to relieve Americans in this
And
area.
I think that's too bad, right? Like, people should
Yeah,
not be killing people who run healthcare companies, right? I think we can pretty much
it
all
it
agree on
should
that.
never have to come to
Um,
that. It should never. We
no,
should have
I
never
mean,
been at this point in the first place. Not that it justifies it
yeah,
in any
no,
capacity,
yeah.
but
Uh,
it's just sad that we're at this point.
it is, and I think part of part of why I think that's particularly scary is I think that it's from a place of helplessness, that there is no way to reform healthcare companies.
Right.
And it's like, folks, vote, go ahead. Like, this is not a thing that's hard to do. It's not a thing that our government can't do. Our government absolutely can rein in healthcare companies. We like This is something we know how to do it. That there is a party that advocates very fervently for their plan to do this in every election. And so if you are really frustrated about this, I promise a more effective way to do it is going out and electing one more Democratic congressperson. Um, I promise it's going to be a more effective way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we have not seen a broad swath of reform since events as of late. So that's a very good point. It's to just get more
Mm.
involved to everybody who feels this strain. All right, from Sleepy Weasel, we have there's a little bit of context here. During the last election, the Democrats had a difficult time getting their economic messaging across and leaned much heavier into social issues. While important, this
Mm.
didn't resonate with voters. How can we correct this in messaging going forward and counter blatant misinformation put into the mainstream by Republicans?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'll say to start, I think the issue of reproductive freedom and abortion rights. I think that is a popular thing that Democrats should keep a big part of their platform because I think it's something that we win on this issue when it comes to a public referendum vote. Most of the time, most people lean on the side of being pro-choice than being absolutely there's no choice ever in reproductive decisions. That's an issue where Democrats consistently I mean, 80% of people broadly say this should be a choice that women have in this country. Huge, overwhelming majorities of people. So that's got to stay a part of the platform. I do think on the economic side, um, we need to make more, like we were talking about earlier, those common sense arguments. But I think that it should be, what like what Sleepy Weasel says. You can't lean on if you're not doing a good job communicating the economic issues. You can't just be like, all right, abandon it, whatever. We'll talk about social issues. That's not a real option. That's not a real electoral strategy. You have to be able to do both. You
Yeah,
can't just rely on one. And so if the economic messaging isn't working, the solution to that is to change the messaging, not to be like, oh well, let's abandon that plan and talk about social issues. You got to win on both because people care about both of those two things, and you can't just switch your focus when things get tough. You got to
yeah,
win on both issues.
yeah. Absolutely agree with you there. All right, one last one if you still have the time.
Sure.
Do you think the government should take better care of our veterans? Coming from a military family, I've seen firsthand on what PTSD does, along with other health complications. Should the government be doing more for our brave men and women for serving and protecting our country? And that comes from Colts Fans for Life.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have been someone who's from a military family and have seen how the VA has struggled to cope with a large number of people. I also think one thing that we got to remember is that our veteran population is aging just like the American population.
Yes.
So we're going to actually need to get better at this. We like the current state of what we're doing. Not only is it not enough right now, if we don't improve, it's going to get worse and worse as we continue to have an even larger number of veterans aging. So it's a huge issue where you actually can't even be reactive to that at all. You have to start getting better on it now, or you're really going to be in an issue later on. And I think what's been really concerning lately is that the VA is getting gutted, and people are getting fired, and we're losing the ability to provide a lot of the essential services that we already are. And I think one of the hardest things that people need to remember is that building up competency takes a lot of time. And while reforms and going through and trying to create efficiency can definitely sometimes be helpful. When you're firing the people who provide services to veterans and you're telling people that you can't hire replacements for them, you're going to have a lot of veterans who serves the country who are going to die and not get the services that they need left and right because you're not providing that. And so I think to end on a really important note, underscoring why it is important to be involved and to vote and to make your views. You can vote and sometimes you don't get the person that you like elected, and so then you have to kind of resort to, okay, the guy that I didn't want won this election. Now we've got to be really clear because a majority of Americans did not vote to defund the VA. Americans have to be really clear about that, and they have to call. We're seeing more calls into Congress people left and right, and especially if you're someone who voted for Trump and you don't think the VA can be defunded. I mean, what's always like the most popular Google search after the election? Can I change my vote? Can I vote for somebody else? No, you can't. But it's even more important if you're somebody who voted for Trump. Um, and you don't agree that the VA should be funded, your voice is even more important. You should call and say, I don't agree with what Mr. Trump is doing, and we shouldn't do this, because your voice is actually even more important to hear from. And I think that on so many of these issues, whether it's defunding the VA or healthcare, especially if you feel like I voted for this guy and this is not what I wanted, it's even more important. You can't vote again for 4 years. You've got 4 years to wait until you can change the choice, right? There's no going back. So now it's even more important to be involved, call your congressperson, speak about what it is that you actually want happening with the federal government, because we're here now and there's 4 more years. And
Yep.
so I think it's important to make both arguments. You got to vote, and between those elections, you got to be involved and talk about what it is that you want.
Yeah. You voted one way, and now you have 4 years of work so that you can fix
Right.
the way that you voted.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah,
forward.
and I think it's important to remember that the American system is designed not only to have public input once every 4 years. You get to make, you're an American, you get to give public input all the time. You get to
Yes.
put your voice into considerations left and right every day of the year. It's your government, and I think that that's something that Democrats can run a really popular platform too. If we talk about the fact that we're a party that truly believes in that, we don't believe that you get to put your input in once every 4 years, and we run the government in those 4 years, and don't give us your thoughts about it. We don't care. We won, and we're going to do what we want. No, I mean, we're the party who we ask for your votes every 4 years, and we ask for your opinion every other day, because it matters. How people think in this country the country should be governed, and that's the real source of democracy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. One last comment, not a question. Sleepy Weasel said, "Oh man, I hope this guy is in charge of big stuff someday." So you have at least in this
Thank you.
community, you have future prospects, and I hope that you continue to build that snowball of momentum in your career. And
We're working hard to get the party in the right direction.
absolutely, Jack, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. The first ever PoliProx interview is what we're calling it. Political proximity, what it's generally short for.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I said that at the beginning, but it is an absolute pleasure to get to really chat with you today. And thank
Thank
you
you
on
very much.
behalf of all the chatters that were able to see this. Once I have it posted, I'll DM you the link through Discord on YouTube if you ever do want to come back and reference, or even if you just want to see what I really look like. Since you didn't get to see the camera today, so apologies for that. That being said, do you have
Well,
any
thank you very
final
much.
thoughts? Oh, thank you, sir.
Yep, I'll do it. Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care, Jack. I hope you have a good one.
I know.
All right, let me pull up. Don't want to end quite yet. Holy cow. There we go. All right. This looks all right for you guys. Um, yes, thank you, Jordan, for the feedback. Thank you all for the feedback during the stream today. Thank you for chatting even when I wasn't as responsive. That's probably how these PoliProx interviews will go, where I'm more engaged with the interviewee until it's time for questions. So hopefully none of you felt ignored. I know that's not how I typically do things around this stream. But that being said, I thought Jack did a really great job with this interview. And again, he had no idea what questions I was gonna ask. He kind of put a lot of trust in me to not do like gotchas, which I don't really want to do gotchas for anybody. I want more people's genuine thoughts and opinions. Um, but you guys will have to let me know what you thought of this stream, if you liked this format. The original plan was to play a game like Fortnite or Minecraft with Jack, um, and have kind of an ongoing discussion during this. For this first one, I honestly feel like this format worked better, just so that I could get my feet wet in this interview setup. I haven't really interviewed a ton of people in my professional career, so this is a first. Um, that being said, I do think it might be more engaging for multiple viewers to have PoliProx be over the course of a game like Fortnite or Minecraft. The reason we couldn't is because he had Java and I have Bedrock, and I really didn't feel like giving Minecraft more money to buy Java on my computer, and I certainly wasn't going to force him to buy Bedrock. Or no, he has a Mac and he can't run Bedrock. What the issue was. That being said, hearing well-informed younger people speak is such a relief. Yes, we definitely have good people out there. Uh, we need to recruit more well-informed, well-intentioned people into politics and get them engaged, including myself. I like this format better. It feels more professional. Maybe we'll keep it this way. Maybe we'll try it another way. We'll see. It also might it might depend on who the person is. If it's a younger person, they might be more inclined to do the game. I would just have to make sure that I lock into the interview over the game. And yeah, not distracted by the game. So yeah, I would definitely have to lock in. Back, sorry, I'm left. No problem at all, Natalia. We just wrapped up with Jack. It was a great interview. And yeah, I really can't thank him enough for coming on. I know he's gone already, but it was a real blessing to have him be willing to come on the stream and do this for the first time ever with no real reference point to who I am. I'm not sure if he researched me at all before. If he did, he was probably terrified. The interview was really good. I thought, at least. He gave a lot of really great answers, and we had some good back and forths, and he also did a really good job of answering chat's questions, I thought. So hopefully you guys also appreciated his answers. I personally really liked his take on healthcare and taking care of veterans. I personally feel like if people are willing to sacrifice their lives for this country, we should be taking extremely good care of them, especially for the things that are directly caused by their service in the military. So that being said, I think we're gonna call this wraps. We are going to go live in just a few minutes after this with some World of Tanks, I believe. But we are going to switch off because I'm on PC and that's going to be on Xbox. So that being said, we have 6 viewers. We can do a raid here if anybody's live. Let's see, we got somebody live. I'll join them for World of Tanks. Excellent. All right, guys, you know the drill on raids. Remember, the world needs you. I hope to see you in a little bit. Let's do this AJ Calvary raid, and make sure you say for Winston stream, and give them a follow if you're willing. All right, let's count down. Raiding in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, have a good one, guys.